Storytellers don't just talk about the world, they shape it. The stories we share are like soil. They're living, dynamic, and the kinds of stories we choose to tell determines the kind of world that grows around us. Welcome to the start of a new series for me all about storytelling for impact, using creativity to make change. I'm using everything I've learned from the worlds of activism, art, communication science, ecology to help anybody who wishes to make a positive change in the world. Maybe you work in a nonprofit, or maybe you volunteer and raise funds in support of a specific cause. Maybe you're trying to start a project of your own. Or maybe there's just some cause or something you care deeply about, and you want to use whatever opportunity, whatever platform you have to move the needle there. That's awesome. We need more people who are committed to doing that outside of these formal roles. Whatever it is, I want to help. Sometimes I'm going to be sharing more practical tools and exercises and things I've learned. Other times I'm probably going to be more in the philosophical realm about how change is made, some paradigms I've gained through the work I've done that have helped make it make a lot more sense. Today I'm playing ball on that court. I'm sharing a huge lesson I've learned about staying motivated to keep advocating for the things I care about. Climate, preventing gun violence, racial justice, compassion for refugees. So if these are the sorts of things you care deeply about, you know that trying to be an advocate for action can be extremely exhausting, right? These are controversial subjects. They're not dinner table fodder. You've probably thought, what is so controversial about just wanting to help people and keep people safe? I get it. These are things that are hard to talk about because people's whole identities are caught up in where they stand on these issues. That's why they become issues. If you approach these subjects, you often find yourself fielding all kinds of unkind responses. I recently heard from someone who, was just like, I don't know what to do with these school shootings anymore. They make me super sad, of course, but every time I try and talk about it, every time I try and talk about how things need to change, how we need to change, I just get into these debates. I've been losing relationships over them just by talking about that need for things to be different. I see you. I get that. And that's why creating change, especially when that change relies on shifting public perception, is a total marathon. It's a big part of the reason why the MLKs and Mandelas of this world are such heroes. Shifting perception takes a ton of persistence. It takes a willingness to say these things that you know are going to be deemed controversial. You know they're going to be misunderstood and drive unpleasant pushback, and yet you have your eyes on the big picture, and you know that takes stamina. I want to share a paradigm shift that helps me hang on to that stamina, even during those times I accidentally find my way into the comments section. There's this quote by Niels Bohr that's like, the opposite of a deep and profound truth is often another deep and profound truth. Well, this paradigm shift is something like that. Now, this paradigm shift comes from my role as a dad. I have 3 kids, a 3-year-old and 2 1-year-old twins, so every day my life is like part miracle and part Animaniacs episode with kids that young. Dad life for me is in full effect. And one thing that's made me realize is the subtle but important difference between influence and control. As a parent, it kind of serves you well to, at some point, realize and accept the fact that you have no control. You do have profound influence, and you need to recognize that and shape what that influence ends up becoming, but you also have no control. And you shouldn't let that lack of control stop you from being the best steward of your influence that you can be. I know, these are almost conflicting ideas, but they're both super important. As a parent, you realize, hopefully early on, that your kids are their own people. Like, their choices are theirs. I have twins. That's like the perfect controlled experiment, right? Like, same environment, they have the same daily routines, like, they're not identical, but they share a lot of the same DNA, and it's like, the choices they make are still so wildly different and so true to their own distinct personalities. Now, I'm not saying you can't set boundaries and expectations and all that stuff, and I'm like, this isn't really like the parenting advice corner, but just establishing that, like, that stuff's important, especially in the early years. But soon enough, you realize that you only have so much of that. And at the end of the day, their choices are their choices. You can influence them, and I'm going to talk about influence in a bit, but you can't control that decision making. When parents have too many expectations that they'll be able to steer their kids into certain directions, it often leads to disappointment. However, what you do have as a parent or as a changemaker is influence. Even though you can't control the choices your kids make, you have a hand in shaping the way they approach certain decisions. You have a hand in shaping the lenses through which they view the world, the settings, the people, the situation around them. This sets the stage for what kids see as right or wrong or important or significant. It's astonishing how many older adults whose parents have long passed away still make decisions, still have their choices influenced by how their parents shaped the way they see the world. But beyond that, the even bigger influence on your kids, bigger than the things you tell them, bigger than the things you say, is the stuff you do in front of them, right? It's ridiculous how many of our parents' behaviors and habits we adopt and take on ourselves, and often we don't realize this until we're sharing life with a partner or trying to raise kids with somebody, and then all these things come out. The way we were raised overwhelmingly shapes how we see the world. It's why the most classic thing for a therapist to say is tell me about your mother, or why every character arc in Ted Lasso is about the guy's relationship with his dad. It's these would be cliches if they weren't so true to people's experiences. As a parent, this can totally create a ton of pressure, right? It's something as mundane as the tone of your voice as everyone's getting into the car on the way to school can be something that has an impact that's felt 40 years into the future after you're gone or something. You just gotta own the fact that you're not gonna bat 1,000 and be willing to learn and grow as you go. As a parent, this can feel like you've drawn the short straw twice. You don't have control, but you do have influence, and so everything you say has the potential to cause catastrophe. It doesn't always work in the negative though. This thing about influence, it works in the positive direction in so many ways too, so don't forget that. All right, if you're not a parent and you're just here to learn how to communicate for change, thank you for bearing with me thus far as I dove into that world of parenthood, and I promise you it applies to what you're doing too, because this concept is the same. You have very little control, and you have a lot of influence. I cannot control the US political landscape. I can't control public perception around certain issues. I can't control how a random person in the audience might react to something I say or write based on their own lived experiences. But by speaking, by sharing anyways, by initiating a conversation I think is important, I'm refusing to let go of that influence. I'm making sure the opportunity to create influence is not going to waste. I believe we're supposed to be stewards of our natural environment, treat it like the gift from the creator that it is. I believe we were supposed to be good stewards of our financial resources, especially as some of the most privileged people in human history. Just like those things, I believe we're supposed to be good stewards of the influence we have. You don't need to be an influencer to have influence. It doesn't take thousands of followers. In the long run, most of us have a small number of people in our closest circles where we have the strongest influencers. And it's the same for a mega social media influencer as it is for just an ordinary person. You have a handful of people in your up close circle. That's where your influence is the strongest. Of course, there's some ripples out to the further circles, but it all starts close to home. I think it's important to remember the value of this influence, because sometimes we think that in order to have an effective conversation about migration or climate change or any given important issue, we need to do all this homework and study and research a bunch so we can have the perfect polished counter argument to whatever the uncle at the dinner table is going to bring up. It's great to research and learn. That stuff will take you far. It's absolutely helpful and worth the time. But it's not a prerequisite. And if we make persuasion our target, I think that's because we've fallen for this belief that we actually have control when we don't. I think this makes this whole issue of polarization worse in the long run, because that means that when people are able to speak on an issue like climate change or migration, when they're willing to do that, they do so because they feel prepared to have a debate. It's why all our conversations about these topics end up with this dynamic of debate. Everyone's a little more heated, everyone's just kind of seeing it as a zero-sum argument. And it makes those who feel like they're on a journey, like they're growing and learning and taking in new information, but that they're honestly concerned, it makes them a little more hesitant. Just like my friend on the issue of gun control, it makes them go silent. And they turn into a silent majority. Like they don't want to enter that argumentative space. So these nuanced, probably healthier voices are often underheard and absent, even though they represent the way the majority of people feel. I think when we share our experiences openly in a human way, we allow them to influence others. Not control, but influence. I think influence can make it normal to talk about a subject that is often easier to avoid. Maybe that looks like sharing a personal story, and maybe that leads somebody to think, hey, I've actually experienced something similar. I've thought on that same wavelength, and now I know I'm not alone. Maybe it leads that person to share their experiences more widely, and suddenly this topic becomes less taboo. The experience is a less lonely one. This has been the exact pattern for how many marginalized communities have found more acceptance. I think a lot of the positive shifts we've seen in our ability to talk about LGBT acceptance or disability rights or climate has come from people who approach it with that posture. One more time, you have tremendous influence. There's a lot in the world you don't have control of. It's healthy to accept those things. But don't let that stop you from also recognizing the areas where you have influence. And be the best steward of that influence you can be. All right, I hope that was clarifying in some way. I'm an environmentalist. Ecologically, you can't not have an impact on what's around you. All right, I hope that was helpful or clarifying in some way. Thanks for hanging. More good things coming. Follow, like, subscribe. Find me elsewhere on the internet. You know all those things. If you have a specific topic you want me to dive into, let me know. Otherwise, Creative Changemaker, I will see you later.